Welcome back to Just Facts Academy, where you learn how to research like a genius. Remember, applying our 7 standards of credibility you learned in the first video series and putting in the effort moves you way ahead of the pack. And now, we're taking it up a notch. So let's add to your lead and shine the spotlight on surveys. Quick survey. Do you believe surveys are reliable? Some believe surveys, also known as polls, can never be accurate due to some notable failures. Others believe any poll that tells them what they want to hear. And unfortunately, too many trust their personal pollster, aka gut instincts. The fact is, surveys are indispensable tools for discovering valuable information we can use in practical ways. However, we need to understand their inner workings in order to assess their accuracy. So, let's take a closer look at surveys, learn the right questions to ask, and if you stay tuned, we'll give you free access to a Just Facts Academy secret weapon. It's expensive and frequently impossible to collect information from every person in a town, state, nation, or the world so that we can know about their needs, wants, standards of living, health status, political views, and thousands of other insightful measures. Want to give it a shot? I didn't think so. Fortunately, we can obtain such data through scientific surveys, and there's often no other reasonable way to get it. In fact, people commonly use data from surveys without even knowing it. Official data on crime, education, employment, the economy, and an enormous array of other statistics are commonly collected through surveys. And this information is widely used by everyone, from students and CEOs to farmers and world leaders. If conducted correctly, surveys can achieve considerable accuracy while polling only a tiny portion of a population. As the book Statistics for K-8 Educators states, a national random sample of 1,000 people can accurately represent 200 million people. I know that may sound crazy, but the textbook Statistics, Concepts, and Controversies explains why it's true. Imagine sampling harvested corn by thrusting a scoop into a lot of corn kernels. The scoop doesn't know whether it's surrounded by a bag of corn or an entire truckload. As long as the corn is well mixed, so that the scoop selects a random sample, the variability of the result depends only on the size of the scoop. Okay, that makes sense, but then why are polls so often wrong? Here are the usual culprits. First, they can be way off base if they don't use random samples of respondents. Remember the kernels example? Oops, wrong kernels. There we go. The scoop is only an accurate representation of the whole if all the kernels are mixed well. Consider internet, mail, and email surveys. These are frequently suspect because although they may seem random, the people who respond are typically different in important ways from the people who don't. As explained in the Mind on Statistics textbook, surveys that simply use those who respond voluntarily are sure to be biased in favor of those with strong opinions or with time on their hands. Seemingly blind to that reality, a so-called fact checker named PolitiFact repeatedly cites an article in a science journal claiming to, quote, assess the scientific consensus on climate change through an unbiased survey of a large and broad group of Earth scientists. However, the article was based on an unweighted internet survey with a 31% response rate, without any way of knowing what the other 69% think or why they didn't respond. Does that seem broad or unbiased to you? Bottom line, even if a poll was conducted by scientists, survey scientists, and is published in a science journal, that doesn't mean it's a scientific poll. A book published by Pennsylvania State University Press says it well. Quote, scientific polls use sampling procedures where random samples are used. That is, where each individual in the group has an equal chance of being selected into that sample, or where some variation of this pattern is used to account for any differences. But there is a way to account for such differences. It's a process called weighting. This involves, quote, adding extra weight to the responses of underrepresented groups. For example, if 40% of respondents for a poll of registered voters are females, the pollsters may place more mathematical weight on the responses of these women because 53% of registered voters are women. Pollsters also perform weighting balances on race, age, education, income, and many other variables. However, weighting does not guarantee that a poll's results are accurate. particularly if the respondents differ in ways that transcend the factors that are weighted. Here's another important factor to consider. Be aware that even scientific surveys with perfectly random samples can still be inaccurate if respondents have reasonable motives to lie. For example, unauthorized immigrants who participate in polls sometimes claim that they are citizens to hide that they are in the US illegally. Finally, as explained in an academic book about statistics, the wording of questions is the most important influence on the answers given to a sample survey. Confusing or leading questions can introduce strong biases, and change in wording can greatly affect a survey's outcome. Don't trust the results of a sample survey until you have read the exact questions asked. So let's recap. Before you blindly trust or dismiss a survey, it's important to ask these questions. 1. How was the sample gathered? Was it truly random and scientific, or were certain people more likely to participate than others? 2. Were the results weighted? If they were, could respondents differ in ways beyond the factors that are weighted? 3. Is there a reasonable motive for the surveyed population to lie? 4. What is the exact wording of the questions? Were they phrased in a way that could bias the answers? If the survey doesn't present the exact questions or any other vital information about how the data was gathered, that's a big red flag. It's best to file it in the "something's fishy" folder. And finally, what's the margin of error? This is often included in poll results, but there's more to it than meets the eye. First, this measure of uncertainty only accounts for something called the sampling error. It doesn't include all the other pitfalls we've already discussed. Without getting into the details, sampling error is related to the number of people in the survey. Generally speaking, the more people surveyed, the lower the sampling error. But be aware, this is just a rough high-end estimate for the margin of sampling error. It could actually be much smaller in certain cases. If you really need to be precise, have we got something for you?
Yes!
Are you ready? And now, presenting the math teacher approved, PhD verified, Just Facts Academy margin of error calculator. Using this Excel file, you can determine a more precise sampling margin of error to judge the reliability of other surveys or create your own. Head over to the URL on the screen and download it today. Armed with your JFA margin of error calculator and equipped with the right knowledge and questions, you can now sort out surveys and probe polls like a genius.